Welcome to Stage Explorations, where we interview the theater creatives and artists from the theater world, those who perform on stage that the audience sees, and those behind the theater stage that the audience almost never sees. I am a journalist and theater fan, Buell Brown, and today's guest is...
My name's James Bonas. I am the director of a new play called UnRavelled by Jake Broder. And if you want to know more about it, listen to this podcast.
My first question, when did you first fall in love with theater, and why did you have to be part of the theater world?
I first fell in love with theatre, oh my God, like age 3, 4? I think, yeah, it's always been the thing I've loved doing as a hobby. As a child, my every birthday present I ever had was to go to the theatre with my friends. And on our house at home, I used to make my sisters be in plays that I'd sort of made. I had to be in them too. And on the top floor of our house, we had a kind of space where we could kind of do stuff. And I had a nanny who looked after me called Joni, who smoked a lot. It was the 70s, so everyone smoked. And I remember doing a version of Aladdin where I decided I would be the genie and would come out of a kind of wash basket, a sort of laundry basket. And I vivid memory of saying to Joni, okay, you have to fill the laundry basket with cigarette smoke. So I was in it, and she was going to get a smoke effect. So when the lid came off, there'd be a kind of puff of smoke as I arrived. I was inside this thing. She was literally packing it full of Marlboro cigarette smoke so that I could emerge with a puff of smoke. So since anything I can ever remember, that's what I did. My mum once walked down to the kitchen, and it's in the north of England. It's always cold. So we have this... an oven called an Arga. It's a big kind of range oven, I guess, but it's always hot. It's always on. And my sisters were there. We'd just been to see Peter Pan like a couple of days before. And my sisters were saying to me, I think it was about, again, 4 or 5, you can do it, you can do it, you can fly. And so I stood on the kitchen table and I launched myself head first into the Arga, thinking, so yeah, it's ever since I was a child, I had puppet theatres. I used to write little plays and put people in them. It's all I ever wanted to do.
When did you fall in love with directing, and when did it go from an interest to an obsession?
I think, well, the question of when did I fall in love with directing, it actually grew quite slowly because I trained rather as an actor and I was still acting. And then I was sitting in a cafe in London in the rain, and I'd been out in New Mexico, up in Taos and Santa Fe, tutoring family, working with the family with this kid, and I loved living there. It was very beautiful, and I've been to the opera in Santa Fe a couple of times, and I come back to London. I'm sitting in the rain reading the Observer magazine on a Sunday, and it was an article about this theatre director, Jonathan Kent, who used to run the Almeida Theatre in London, and he was one of the first people back in the 90s that sort of, it happened before, but he started a new wave of famous people coming over. So Kevin Spacey, and Cate Blanchett and Juliette Binoche, he cast them in shows and then did them. And so he was very kind of much in vogue, and I had just seen a King Lear he'd done. It was amazing. Anyway, I was sitting in the rain reading this article about he was going to Santa Fe to work on the first opera he'd ever worked on, a Janacek opera, Kasia Kabanova, which comes from an Ostrowski play, The Storm. So it's not in terms of pieces of opera, it's very much like a play. It doesn't have a sort of formal structure like Baroque opera or 18th century opera, and it's not as romantic as 19th century opera. Janacek really took plays and then set them to music. Anyway, and I was reading this article about he was going to Santa Fe and he'd never been there and he'd never worked on an opera. So I just wrote him a letter. It was pre-email. I handwrote a letter and said, look, I've just come back from Santa Fe and I'm sitting in London and the weather's rubbish. I'd much rather be back in Santa Fe. I don't like opera, but I know music. I'm a pianist and I could, I'm an actor. Maybe I'll come with you. And I didn't hear anything for like 8 months. And then his PA wrote to me, again, handwritten letter saying, if you were serious, you could meet Jonathan for a coffee. And so I met him for coffee and we've gotten really well. And I ended up going to Santa Fe with him and working on this opera. And in the opera, there's a singer in the US called Patricia Rosset, who's an amazing actor. And she could really act and sing. And that was the first time I'd ever, in terms of opera, kind of gone, oh, wow, there's a whole world here that could be really interesting. And so I became interested in that. For quite a long time, I didn't really direct actors, partly because I think it would have been quite difficult for me because I am an actor. And I think being an actor is like being an alcoholic. You never give it up. You're still an actor even when you're not acting. It's like a way of life. And I think I would have been it would have been awkward, I think, because I'd have still wanted to be doing what they were doing. And so actually working music and in opera had enough distance from actual I couldn't do what they were doing, do you see what I mean? So I could help facilitate all of that. And then over time now, then I've ended up doing plays and musicals, and now I work a lot with dance. Actually, I work a lot on kind of ballets, creating new ballets from scratch, creating the story, working with composers to write new music. So now I would say I'm right across all four sort of, there's still theatre actually, but just different forms of theatre.
I'm actually adding this question. What is your favorite thing about directing a play or musical or opera?
My favorite thing about directing a play or musical or opera is actually the collaboration, because I think theatre is essentially a collaborative act. Even when you go to the theatre to watch, or when you're an actor on stage, you are in collaboration with an audience. You're making an agreement. It's an act of agreement that you're going to engage with one another and tell a story, and they're going to attend to the story you're telling, and then how you play with that and how you explore that together is in itself collaborative. So theatre is essentially collaborative, but then making work with groups of people, where I would say the average project I work on is 2 or 3 years to make, probably. I'm now sort of starting to do ones for 2028. And they take a long time frame, and the actors or the singers may come in the last 5 weeks. But up until then, you're working with designers, with composers, with writers, and that this idea that actually one creates in the end a product that's come from no one in particular, but emerges from a group of people in a specific period of time, socio-political time or cultural time, that is a response to a provocation. Sometimes it's an idea, sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's a novel. You're responding to something, and together this group of people produce a thing, and then by engaging with the performers, they then add another set of things to that piece. That the act of collaboration is what's interesting, because what emerges has its own identity that's bigger, both bigger and can be more dynamic than any one person's point of view. And I think that's really interesting, the way that the work itself emerges from the group. And so the sort of work I like to make, of the working environment I prefer to work in, is actually just very horizontal. So it's got to be clear, you need some structure, because someone's got to make decisions, you know, be accountable and kind of go, well, we'll do this, this, and this. But actually, the more horizontal it is, the more space there is for people to contribute ideas and have thoughts. And then you're editing those. I don't believe in a world where everything's great and everything's brilliant and everyone's marvelous. Like, we can all be rubbish. I can have good ideas and really rubbish ones. It's fine. I don't care. It's fine to have a rubbish idea. It doesn't matter. It's not a problem. So you've got to create a space where everyone's okay to try everything, even when it's awful. And when it's awful, we all laugh and go, oh my God, how hilarious. That was awful. It's not a problem. Then I think that I find that very rewarding.
The theater experience, why is it such a unique format for both the actors and the live audience?
So the unique thing about theatre in terms of storytelling, although the kind of form of theatre is just unbelievably ancient, isn't it? It happens in every culture, in every society. There's forms of storytelling. Theatre remains, as I was saying earlier, a collaborative game, so that the act of engagement by the audience changes the thing they're looking into. They're not passive, they're active within the space and the stage. So the show itself changes depending on the audience. You're not delivering a product that is a consistent thing that just arrives on a plate and then you consume it as an audience. The audience is actually engaged with it as it happens, and their engagement changes it. I guess the most extreme version of it would be a stand-up comedian. The gig of a stand-up comedian is fundamentally changed by the audience. The hecklers, the way they interact with them, they'll suddenly turn a corner and tell a joke they hadn't planned to tell. And so a different, slighter form of that happens in every performance on stage. As an actor, you can feel the audience and you respond to that. You stretch a moment or you speed up a moment, and the audience may laugh in one place or respond in another. And so to understand that negotiation between audience and stage is active and connected is really important, and to attend to it, and to know where you ask the audience to engage in a particular way. So that a lot of the theatre that I'm quite interested in at the minute is ones where you don't pretend what they're looking at is real, because that's a ridiculous thing to do, because they're sitting in a very uncomfortable seat in a theatre, so they know it's not real. It's no point. Why would you do that? In a way, it's kind of Brechtian, but it's just daft. Of course it's not real. They can see the light. They know they're in a theatre. They're not idiots. Instead, what you do is you play an imaginative game with them. You go, okay, let's do this. It's just the same. Adults are only children in big clothes. So when you're little and you play a kid, play a child, play games as a child, one kind of goes, oh yeah, look, there's a blah, 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 come falling out of the tree, and they may make up the name of a monster, and then you all go along and you play that game. And you go, oh, okay, and then you establish a set of rules, and then you play according to those rules. And if, as a director, you're clear with the audience about the set of rules you're establishing, audiences are generally very good and very generous about going along with you. And the more that you ask them to make a jump in the way that you're engaging with them, the more they commit. So the most tedious thing you can do in theatre is pretend, A, that it's real, because it's just daft, and B, just ask them to passively watch something. So I work with the puppeteers who made Warhorse back in the UK on another show for like a year, for a long time. And they were really clear that, when they work with puppets, a Handspring puppet company, they never hide the puppeteer. You can see the puppeteer moving it. You don't pretend. You see it all the time. But then the movement of the puppet is so believable that you're caught in this trap where you go, oh God, that looks real. Oh my God, it looks like the horse is breathing. But you can see the person in the horse moving its head. And that sort of tension between the fact that you can see it's not real, but it's behaving as if it is, the audience then makes an emotional commitment, which is much greater than if you're just pretending that what they're looking at is like a movie set, but they happen to be looking at the reality. That imaginative engagement then triggers an emotional response.
To add to that, why is it worth, if you see the play at the beginning or the production at the beginning of the run, why is it worth seeing it later?
So during the course of a run, a play can change very substantially, because the play exists. Of course, if Jake was here, a play exists in the words, but it also exists between the words. And a play exists in the actors' performances, but it also exists in the space between the actors. And so those things develop and shift and morph. There may not be words added, there may not be actors added, but those other things are very mutable, and they change every night. A director, when I was at drama school, said a thing to me that was, I liked it. He said, look, any one night, there's a set of stepping stones you have to step on in order for the storytelling to be clear and the scene to be fulfilled. So if someone's going to die of eating a poisoned apple, they've got to get hold of the apple and then they've got to eat it. But the way you go between the stepping stones is different every night, and should be different every night. It can't be the same. And so often during a run, the stepping stones themselves also shift, because the play itself finds a room to breathe. It starts to understand what it is. The actors start to understand how to take an audience on the journey through the play, the shape of it, which when you haven't done it before is really unknown. And that takes time to kind of find out how to form that. And so, between the beginning of a run and the end of a run, a play can change substantially.
Talking about Jake, when did you first hear about the play UnRavelled?
I first heard about UnRavelled when I was actually doing a performance of, I made with a group of people, a production of L'Enfant et Sortilège, which is a Ravel opera, a one-act opera, and we did it with the National Opera of Lyon about 10 years ago. And I was working with an animator, Grégoire Pont, French guy. We were working together on this production, and it did really well, and then it's toured all over the world, really, in loads of different places. And one of the places it went to was San Francisco Symphony. And so we were doing a production of it there. And Jake was up in San Francisco with the GBHI, the Global Brain Health Institute, during his fellowship year. He didn't know I'd done it. Jake and I have known each other since I was 19 or 20, for a long time. I didn't know who was in town. He didn't know I'd made the show. He just went along to watch it because someone said, oh, there's a Ravel piece, you should watch it. And then he saw my name in the program and laughed a lot, and he really liked the show. Anyway, so then we had a drink after, and because he messaged me, and he told me of the sort of serendipity of the fact that he was just starting to engage with writing this piece, exploring these ideas about the potential for the play, and it started there, really.
What is unique about playwright Jake Broder's writing, and why did you want to work with him on this project?
So I wanted to work with Jake on the project because I'm always very interested in new writing and creating new works of theatre or dance or opera, because I think those are the kind of that's the only way our art form will survive. It's no good just recycling things. You can do brilliant productions of prior stuff. There's nothing wrong with it. And it's great that classics exist and everything else. It's all great. But if we're going to build and invest in the future, it has to be through the telling of new stories and finding new ways to engage with stuff. So I'm always interested in anything that is sort of nascent, so to speak. And being able to work with Jake early on with this, we were able to go through a workshopping process with it last year in London. And then there was also a kind of developmental stage in San Francisco where we did a version of it. And that involved rewrites and engaging with Jake on the structure of the play and the language of the play and the characters in the play. And so as a director, the more that process is one that is open with a writer and ongoing and mutable and alive, the more interesting it is for me. And I think that, very rarely really do works of art get created by someone just, it's an idea really that the public has in their imagination, that Mozart shut himself in a toilet and wrote Marriage of Figaro, but they didn't. They found it around for ages, for months, doing drafts, trying a thing out, having a go, workshopping bits. So many Shakespeare's plays, Burbage was making up most of the comedy stuff. They just would have improv'd it and then someone wrote it down. So these things, it's not really the artist in the garret coming and go thwack with a finished thing. It's actually how one creates is through a process of iteration and development. And that's been great to work on Jake with that because he's very open, actually. He's very clear about things that are important to him or that he needs or blah, blah, blah. But he's very, very open and generous in response to me kind of going, we need to look at that. And that's a great process. And so I'd say that one of the things that's been excellent about him as a colleague is his willingness to step back and then look at what's on the page and go, how will that appear to an audience? Because that's a constant dialogue. Isn't it? You don't kind of patronize an audience, nor do you spend the whole time wondering or panicking about whether they'll enjoy it. It's not that. It's about what is the story that's going to communicate, and is that the thing I want to communicate?
And for those who don't know the story, tell us the main story arc and the characters in this play.
The main story arc really is about Anne Adams and her husband, Robert. And they were living in Vancouver. She's British originally, but living in Vancouver, he did town planning insofar as he worked in the kind of town planning department. And was also a professor of maths. Mostly. Sorry, he didn't work in the town. I get confused about that. He was a professor of maths who was given a task by the town planning department. And she was a biologist. And prior to the play, their son had a bad road accident and was sort of out of action, so to speak, and needed to be cared for at home for a substantial amount of time. And Anne took over the majority of that care. And while she was doing that, she was painting. I think she'd painted anyway, actually, for quite a long time. But what we learn in the play that she's painting, and her son recovers. We don't see the son in the play, but we learn that the son has recovered. And she carried on painting. In the beginning of the play, she's turning around to her husband and going, look, I've decided that I'm not going to go back to the university and carry on being a biologist. I'm going to paint. And he goes, well, that's a rubbish idea because you're a crap painter. So why would you do that? It's like, it's just a really bad idea. It's not like you're a good painter. And she goes, but it's what I need to do. And so we see this decision made where she's going to stop and she's going to paint. Mostly until then, she'd painted strawberries in various different guises. And we then find that she has been looking for new things to paint or inspirations, and she listens to Ravel's Bolero and forms a kind of instant connection with Ravel's Bolero and some elements of Ravel's world with Ida Rubinstein, who was a dancer who commissioned the piece, and she starts to sort of dip into this world. And at the same time as she then becomes obsessed with Bolero and starts to paint this piece of work, there's certain behavioral changes that we observe in her, shifts in her kind of speaking register and language that she uses, some changes in emotional behavior that aren't too disturbing at first. And her husband is kind of like, okay, we're doing this now, it's going to be like this, okay. But gradually these become more significant as the play goes on. And she paints a transmodal rather than synesthetic painting of Ravel's Bolero, bar, 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 a kind of version of this thing. She does this painting. And at the same time, in the play, in a kind of not so much a dream space, but an imagined space, she's meeting with Ravel and having conversations with him across time. So Ravel becomes a character in the play that she has these conversations with. Cut to the long and the short. She goes on painting, goes on having conversations with Ravel, starts to exhibit language difficulties. And at the same time, we learn through flashback scenes that Ravel also had language difficulties and similar problems to Anne. And what we learn over the course of the play is that Anne has this frontotemporal lobe dementia, which is the same thing that Ravel died of. And in fact, she paints the painting of Bolero at a similar stage in her disease, from which he then composed the music. So there's this kind of across a century, there's these two people kind of connecting in a kind of response to a disease process in their brain that then triggers a certain simpatico, I guess, across time. And so we go through the path of Anne's illness, and there's another character, Bruce, who is the neuroscientist, who then got connected to Bruce Miller. She went to work with him during her illness, where he was then, it's the early 90s, mid 90s. So he was doing brain scans and MRIs, and they were looking at her deterioration in her frontal lobes, which is to be expected. But what he noticed was that there was actually a growth in the part of her brain connected to vision and visual processing. And so what happens is she finds a trajectory in her art where she got better at it. From her relatively rudimentary beginnings, she goes into quite expressive art, quite complex ideas, and then through in another stage, she hits a kind of photorealistic period where she paints pebbles in a bowl that really looks like a photograph. She paints a migraine that she has. She does a big painting, which is a kind of study of the number pi. And we can chart you can make a kind of connection between the development of her art and the progress of the disease. So she kind of actually grows in an ability, and her part of her brain was actually growing at the same time as another part was suffering damage. And so where we'd understood about neuroplasticity in the 90s, well, I studied psychology in the 90s, we knew neuroplasticity, we knew that this is a brain's ability to reroute networks when one's damaged. What we weren't so clear about was actually your brain could grow neurons and grow new networks. And this then became a trigger for Bruce Miller to do a long-term study into early signifiers of dementia, which it's been found, not in every case at all, but in a number of cases, a sudden development in linguistic ability, artistic ability, musical ability can be a very, very early sign of changes in the brain associated with dementia, and this could be used as a very early tool for diagnosis. And not only that, but it's also extraordinary reflection of the complexity and mutability of the brain. And so the play goes on and loses function gradually over time, and we parallel that with Ravel's journey. And then at the end, we come to a point where she's died, and we're at the eulogy given by her husband, Robert. But the kind of course of the play, in terms of being a journey of watching someone with a disease, go through that process, is quite known in terms of, there's been a lot of movies and plays based on that sort of shape. But what's interesting is the parallel journey that Ravel's going on. And also, it became clear when we were rehearsing it actually back in May, how much really it's also a play about Robert. It's really, really a play about the carer and that journey for the person who's seeing the person they love disappear in one level in front of them. And so it's a complex piece because it's got all of those different dynamics to explore, and yet it's not without hope. It's not actually something where you're just meant to sort of cry at the end and go, oh, isn't it awful, poor woman. There's a lot of the science inside it. It's actually really hopeful, very exploratory, very engaging, and important.
Is it easy or more difficult to create a play with dealing with real people and historical characters?
Creating a play dealing with real people or historical characters is, in some ways, you get a leg up because there's a kind of foundation that you can stand on, because there's stuff you can research, you can look at this. in another way, you've got to make decisions about how you create drama, because the trajectory of someone's life is not dramatic. It's just the trajectory of someone's life. Facts are not dramatic. They're just facts. And so you don't create drama by just showing people a bunch of stuff. And so then the drama actually exists in friction between people, or people's internal friction with themselves, or, you know, being presented with two terrible choices and having to make one of them. Or I just made a ballet now with a brilliant French choreographer, Sophie Laplan, and we premiered it, Scottish Ballet, we premiered it at the Edinburgh International Festival. And that was all about Mary, Queen of Scots. So of course you can go through the beats of her life, but it doesn't make it interesting to watch. That's just go, you know, you might as well read a history book. That's fine. But why on earth do I have to watch that on stage? So when you're engaging with real people's lives, you have to not get caught in the trap of being so fascinated by their life that you think anyone else is going to give a damn, because that's not enough. And also you have to, I kept saying to Jake, oh dear, poor man. You have to, I was using more explicit language in this because I'm English, but I was saying you have to allow us to create people who are awful. Although Anne was a lovely person, and Bruce is a lovely person, and Robert was a good person, lovely. You can't just show a bunch of lovely people for an hour and a half being nice to each other in a difficult situation. It's just incredibly tedious. It's not drama. You've got to allow people to behave very badly in a way that they didn't in life. I'm not saying they did do that, but to create drama out of it, you've got to create problems. And people have to look at their problems and then be faced with them and then try to deal with them. I don't know. So that's a thing that you have to be careful not to. Of course, you don't want to do stuff that's then going to offend, you know, Robert's still alive, Bruce is still alive. You don't want to do stuff that's going to offend them, but they're not the people in the play. The people in the play need to be the characters that the audience is going to engage with, and they have to behave in ways that the people in real life didn't.
What do you want the audience to get out of this play?
I would like the audience to get different things out of the play. I guess, in a way, it's interesting actually going to watch plays with friends or whatever, because I think I'm quite a horrible audience member. I really like things that I think I'm not going to, and often things I think I'm going to like, I don't. So what I'm trying to say is I can go to watch a play with 4 people and we'll all get different things. It's one of the things that's interesting about a play. Do you know, if you look at the art of Yves Klein, I made a film about him. He did those very, very beautiful paintings that were often just blue. Everybody's going to take a very different thing, because the question, the piece itself, Yves Klein's painting, doesn't give you any answers. It just gives you questions. And then it's up to you to deal with that as you will. So in a way, I think the play needs to make us ask questions and not give answers to them. So if you go away and it makes you think about the way your brain, what an extraordinary thing it is, the brain, and how unknowable it is still. And we have really clueless, and yet fascinating it is. If it makes you go away and you think about the importance and strength of relationships, and how in appalling times people kind of find their way to each other. Or if it makes you think about identity, personal identity, what is it to be a person? Where does personhood consist? Is it in the ability to communicate? Is it not? Is it in? These are quite interesting questions that the play raises up, although sometimes quite quickly you can kind of waft off into kind of philosophical ideas and existential ideas and psychological ideas. So I think at an emotional level, I think you sort of want people to walk away with a sense of wonder.
And why is this play such a relatable play for today's audiences?
The play is relatable for a modern audience because it speaks to, on different levels, I think it speaks to family and relationships, and how, as we grow older and change, those relationships change and tensions can come to bear on them. And I think that's the case whatever's happening in your life, whether you get something like dementia or you don't. That those things, as we change as people, our relationships shift. And so this is in a way puts a very sharp point on that, because Anne changes very dramatically, and how Robert has to negotiate her change. Yeah, so I think that's relatable to all of us. And then I think in the 70s, everyone was terrified of cancer and didn't like to speak about it. I remember the C word, and even in the 80s, there's a kind of, people hid from it. I think the 90s, people did that with dementia and Alzheimer's. It was just terrifying. It was too frightening a thing to speak about. And I think now there's a fair bit of work now coming up creatively in theatre and film, dealing with dementia and dealing with Alzheimer's in a way that didn't take place 15, 20 years ago. So I think people are looking to learn more about it. Modern audiences are. I don't think we have solutions to those diseases yet, and therefore they remain a kind of terrifying thing to people. But I think if you look at, I don't know, I think it's talked about in a way it wouldn't have been. If you think of the publicity given to Bruce Willis's illness, that just wouldn't have been talked about even 10 years ago. It just would have gone quiet. Instead, now people talk about it. People are addressing it, about how he is and the course of his illness and how he's getting on. And I think so. These plays that speak to that are important because they're part of how plays can only be a reflection of the culture and society they're being born from. And so these are being made because the society itself is asking these questions and looking at these things and is in a place where it's wanting to sort of think about them. And so I think it makes it relatable on a personal level, but it's also relatable on a kind of subject level, because I think it is becoming something that people are wanting to know more about.
And the most important question, why must the viewers attend UnRavelled by Jake Broder?
The audience should come and see this play because it is touching, as I mentioned earlier, on a thing that now concerns all of us, I think. I think when we first came together, the producer, Cath, Brittan, who's an incredibly brilliant person, and Jake and Lucy and me and some of the other actors, there wasn't a single one of us who didn't have someone in our family that had some connection to not necessarily frontotemporal lobe dementia, but some form of Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. It's a story that it's very universal. I think it's maybe partly because so many of us are living longer that it's becoming more recognizable, that we are talking about it more. And so a new play that addresses this with hope, with engagement, that involves an extraordinary story of this woman and her response to the challenge that came upon her, and the way that the art came from her, the way that connects to Ravel, and this sort of connection across time is an extraordinary thing. And the chance to see that combined with a kind of visual language of storytelling and music, we hope will give a kind of unique experience to the audience, which should be very sort of complete, if that makes sense, gestalt, because it's actually coming visually as she did. We use the sound language as a kind of transmodal version as well, so the audience themselves are in the kind of space that Anne was in.
Why is it important to always support new play productions and creative playwrights like Jake?
So if you have a garden or a field, and all you ever do is grow the things that have always been in the soil, over time, the soil gets thinner and depleted because the nutrients of those plants that you keep growing in the same plants in the same soil, it depletes the nutrients of the plants themselves over time, get more fragile and weaker. And in the end, you'll have a garden with lots of wilting, thin, uninspiring flowers. The thing you need to do is change your crop. You need to put in new plants into the soil, plants that will take different nutrients and put other ones back in. And it's fundamental to any ecosystem, this ability to regenerate not an existing thing, but to create new things, because they put back into the system in a different way. They feed the system in a different way. It's a complex thing. And it's the same with drama and theatre. If all we do is keep growing the same crop over and over again, over time, that soil is going to get thinner and thinner and thinner. And yet the soil is the thing that we create the art from. So it's fundamental that we support new writers. It's fundamental that we support new plays, because that is like putting a new seed into that ground and growing a new plant. And that's the way that you end up with a kind of healthy ecosystem. It's no good doing a monoculture. We all know what happens to the fields if you just plant soybeans. And so it's really, really important, really, I'm kind of slightly pushing my analogy, but I'll go for it. It's really important that we allow that to take place, so we end up with something which is both diverse and has depth. And so each new play is important. It doesn't matter if it plays good or rubbish. It's important to invest in supporting it, because it's only through having a breadth of new plays that you get the possibility of the extraordinary.
And to add to that, as you know, ticket sales for a theater production doesn't cover everything anytime in any production. Why is it important for the local communities to not only go and see the productions, but also maybe donate to their local theaters, allow it to continue to grow the garden?
The donation element of theatre is vital because theatre is a costly business, but also you only get the reward via the risk. So if theatre becomes only premised or predicated on financial return, you skew the lens that you're looking through, because everything becomes not about, is this an important story to tell? Is this an audience? It's just about return bang for your buck in terms of the producer or in terms of the thing making money. That doesn't mean that theatre can't make money. It can, it does, it's great when it does. But if the only goal is making money, in a way, the system itself becomes very cynical. And you only have to look at what people at the moment or the last few years have been saying about Hollywood or Hollywood writing or where that's at, where they're going, actually that ground's got quite thin, because it's just, you're recycling another movie for the 13th iteration of its thing rather than actually new ideas. And so to support a theatre in your area, to support new work at that theatre, you're actually fundamentally contributing to how the system itself operates. And we only have the great plays of yesteryear because of donations and people supporting the arts and people investing in them with both their time and their care and their money. That's how they grew. It's how it happened. And so unless we do that, unless we make that effort to participate and to actively support things, then yeah, they won't exist. And what you'll end up with is something that just wants to deliver a product that's going to bang out its maximal return, which is fine. You get a thing that functions perfectly well like that, but go and eat fast food and tell me it's the best food you ever ate in the world. So my name's James Bonas. I'm the director of UnRavelled, which is a new play by Jake Broder. And it's an extraordinary piece that explores a woman's relationships, her family dynamics, her battle with a disease that in the end takes her life, but an incredible thing that happened where she responded, and her own brain responded to that disease with an outburst of incredible creativity. And so the play has an emotional, bang, but alongside it, it's a whirl of scientific discovery and learning about dementia, which is an incredible opportunity to take part in, both as a creative, the show, but also as an audience member. So I say get a ticket, and we'll see you at the theatre.
Welcome to Stage Explorations, where we interview the theater creatives and artists from the theater world, those who perform on stage that the audience sees, and those behind the theater stage that the audience almost never sees. I am a journalist and theater fan, Buell Brown, and today's guest is...
I'm Jake Broder. If you want to learn more about UnRavelled, the new play, or the Global Brain Health Institute, go to unravelledplay.com or just watch this video.
When did you first fall in love with theater, and why did you have to become part of the theater world?
When did I fall in love with the theater? I think it hit me pretty young. I started out as a musician, and I knew when I was 5 that I wanted to play. That's what I wanted to do. And then that changed as I got older and became... I liked performing shows. And that became a love of acting, and then it became theater. It sort of, by the time I was 15 or 16, I was all in. But it started when I was pretty young.
When did you fall in love with writing, and when did it go from an interest to an obsession?
Writing always lived alongside music when I was young. The first thing I ever did was a newspaper called the Sloane Street Informer, which was it was a pencil local newspaper which I made when I was about 8. And ever since then, I was writing stories. It's hard to sort of look at all these things as separate disciplines because it's all telling stories. Sometimes I'm inside it with my whole body, and sometimes I'm outside of it, imagining it and putting it down on paper. But it's telling stories, and that's always been the thing.
Why is playwriting format such a unique format to you? Why do you like writing in that format?
I like writing plays because I can... Because you can imagine anything, and there's no budgetary constraint. There's nothing standing in your way of actually making it happen, because it's just people in a space. And it can be as elaborate as you like, or it can be as simple as you like, but there's nothing standing in the way of you actually getting it done. And so that's part of the joy of it.
What is your writing process from the idea to finishing the play?
My writing process is, from beginning to end, is very different depending on the project. Sometimes there's a lot of research, and then it always starts with sort of like a lightning flash in the back of my head where I imagine it and I can almost see the whole thing, and it just sort of appears in the back. And it also is a needful feeling. It's like, oh, you have to do this story. And I can usually see it completely in my head. And then I have to spend a very long time learning about it and working it out to almost get back to exactly where I started from. Sometimes that can be really quick, and sometimes that takes a very long time.
Where did the story idea come from UnRavelled, and why did you have to write it?
UnRavelled had an interesting origin. It started when... It was for 3 reasons. I was listening to Radiolab, and they did a short piece about Anne Adams and Ravel. And it was one of those public radio driveway moments that they talk about during the fundraisers. I was stuck in the car until it was over. I couldn't get out. And by the time the piece was over, I imagined a story where Anne was going forwards in time and Ravel was going backwards in time, and the disease, and they had that in common, and the music and the painting, and sort of an exploration of the nature of creativity and their relationships, both in their separate worlds and with each other. And I just was swimming in it. I said, I got to tell this story. One of the people who was interviewed on that Radiolab show was Dr. Bruce Miller, and he's the world's foremost expert on frontotemporal dementia. So I wrote him a fan letter, and he, to my surprise, responded. And he asked me whether I was the Jake Broder from Silicon Valley. And I said, yeah. And we struck up a conversation about the case. He gave me a lot of material to read. I asked more questions. We went back and forth a bunch of times. And then he said, look, would you like to be the Hellman visiting artist at UCSF? And this was 2019, I think. And so I said, well, yeah. And they gave me this fellowship, and I went up there to study and interviewed everybody up there at the Memory and Aging Center, which is where Anne Adams was treated, but also it's where they do some of the most amazing research, both into the science and medical aspects of dementia, but also the care and the treatment of it on a very human level. And it's an extraordinary place. And it enriched my understanding of both what the disease is, and what it isn't, what the human cost is, both to the sufferers, to the caregivers, to the people who love people who live with it. And it introduced me to a whole community of people who really just live with this in a very profound way. The second reason I had to do this story is because I think I got some skin in the game. Close family member might be looking down the barrel of this, and my grandma had it. She had Alzheimer's. And the prospect of somebody who you love so dearly losing what makes them them is a terrifying proposition. And it's something that a lot of people have to face. And there has to be a way of talking about it. There has to be a way of processing it and dealing with it. It's not something you can just, we can't just all sit alone in the dark and just be left to it. And the third reason is that we're reaching a point in human history where our bodies are outliving our brains for the first time. And brain health and dementia it's going to become more prevalent. It's going to become ubiquitous. Everybody's going to be dealing with it on some level because you're going to know somebody or love somebody who has it or be someone who has it, or we're living long enough to bump into the limitations of what our brains can do. And so we're going to have to reckon with these issues about dementia and brain health in a very real way, in a way that we've never had to before because we're living longer. So all of those things added up to me to be, I need to tell this story. I need to work on it. And I'm really grateful I had the opportunity from the UCSF and the GBHI, that's the Global Brain Health Institute, of which Dr. Bruce Miller is the co-head. They gave me the opportunity to do this, both to commission the play and then to take a crack at it in this extraordinarily strange pandemic-flavored way.
For those people who don't know the story, tell us the main story arc and the two characters, and also the themes of the story also.
To give you a sense of what UnRavelled is about, it's about, there is a 53-year-old woman. Her name is Dr. Ann Adams, and she is a brilliant biologist. And she's also a pretty crappy painter. And she, with her husband, has been living outside of Vancouver. And their son had a car accident. And when he did, she said, I'm going to stay home and take care of him because the prognosis was that he would never walk again. So she did. And while this was happening, she, wasn't in the lab anymore. And she said, I'm just going to paint. And she painted a lot of strawberries. She painted one obsessive thing over and over. And her husband was amused and annoyed, and it wasn't a big deal, but she wasn't a painter. So it was like, okay, fine. Then, miraculously, the son got better. And he went off to college. And so, an unexpected happy ending there. So, this is where we pick up the beginning of our story. And in UnRavelled, she says, look, she's playing Scrabble with her husband, and she says, look, I have a bit of an announcement. I'm not going to go back to the lab. And the husband's surprised. Well, why? Why not? It's like, because I want to paint. But you're not a painter. And she says, hey, don't you tell me what I can and can't do. And then she has this instinct that she wants to paint. And so it causes some friction in her marriage. And then she starts listening to Ravel's Bolero. And Bolero is a repetitive piece of music. It was written by Maurice Ravel in 1928. And it's not really like anything else he ever made. It's most of what Ravel does is very liquid. It's very impressionistic. He's like Debussy. It flows. And Bolero is very regimented, and it's almost perseverative. It's the same melody repeated X amount of times, exactly without variation, just the orchestration changes. There are people who think of it almost like an etude, or a piece that explores the meaning of what an orchestra can do, rather than a piece of music in and of itself. And yet it is regarded as Ravel's most popular masterpiece. It's played all over the world all the time and has been since it was made. But Ravel hated it. So she becomes obsessed with this music and starts to paint it. And it's a secret. She keeps it a secret. And she's painting and painting and painting. And she makes up this gorgeous painting of it, which is so much better than anything she ever made before. And her husband is surprised and shocked and delighted. And this is like, wow, this is like a whole new person. And then she starts to show the symptoms. And then she starts to lose words. Her personality starts to shift slightly. It gets so bad at one point that she starts picking up the steak knife from the wrong end. She cuts herself. She forgets that she was just in a meeting and comes back again. And she starts to her speech starts to go, but her painting continues to improve. So they take her to see Dr. Bruce Miller, who diagnoses her with primary progressive aphasia, and it's a kind of dementia. And through the course of this, she discovers that Ravel had the same, at 53, Ravel was composed Bolero, which itself is the first symptom of his PPA, which he had, and he, like her, died 7 years later. And they both had the same disease, and they were both inspired by the same piece of music stroke art at the same point in their disease, which was a radical departure for them in terms of their creativity. And the theme of this is exploring the idea of what disease is, what creativity is, what is it to love somebody when they fundamentally change, where do the boundaries lie? And also share a story of a disease which has inside it a great and beautiful gift at the very beginning phases that teaches us hugely about the balance of the mind, in that at the beginning of this disease, language disappears just a little bit, which allows music and visualizing to come to the fore a bit more. And perhaps language is too prominent. Perhaps we're too focused on that, and that takes away from some of the other things that are necessarily having to take a back seat while language has the front of the stage all the time.
Do you think because of your more established knowledge of both music and writing that you were kind of like the perfect writer to write this story?
I don't know. I
should ask, because of your knowledge of music and the play, do you think you were more set or ready to write this story than others because you had a knowledge of both?
Well, what I can tell you about that is that a lot of times I wind up writing about music because the creation of it and its power is something that is obviously very close to my heart. And, you write what you know. So stories that involve music, hit me where I live. And I can understand them because I've lived inside that. I know I understand the frustration of not being able to compose something properly, or not being able to play something properly, or wanting to communicate something with music and not being able to. And so the drama of music is that it is the nature of its human expression that is both abstract and universal. And when there are problems with it, or things that want to come out through it, e.g. strong emotions or dysfunction, I find it easy to translate that into story. I've written musicals, and most of them are not sort of stop and sings, but they have the music inside the story itself. They're musicals about musicians. And this, I suppose, is a play about the creation of music and the struggle of a composer to reckon with his own legacy, and he's raging against the idea that the best thing that he ever created is only happening because he has a disease. And he knows it on some level. And the rest of the world values that piece, which is the thing he likes the least. And I don't know. I enjoy writing about and telling stories about the creation of music because I find it easy to live inside it.
Well, very important question. What do you want the audience to get out of this play?
What do I want the audience to get out of this play? What I want with any story I tell, I want the audience to feel what I felt when I first heard it. I want them to be fascinated with the reality of it. I want to share with them the wonder and the beauty of this story and what it means. I want them to have empathy and sympathy for the people who struggle with this. And I want them to see that there is a magic that you never thought was there inside something that seems quite desperate and deadly.
Very important question. Why must the viewers watch the UnRavelled play event?
Why must people watch? Well, most plays about this subject are very sad, and most stories about this are heartbreaking. This endeavors to lift your heart up a bit, not just break it. And I think that's really, now that I think of it, that is what attracted me to this. This was a story about dementia that didn't break my heart. It actually made it grow a little bit. And I don't know, I think that's a rare thing.
You've mentioned them a lot because they're always sponsoring, but tell me why the Global Brain Health Institute is such an important institute, and why do you enjoy partnering with this play?
The Global Brain Health Institute is an important institution because it does exactly what it says in its title. It is a group of scientists and medical people and artists and all kinds of different folks who are concerned and are interested in brain health and equity in brain health. And they do it all over the world. And because we all have brains or love someone who does, the work they do affects all of us. And I don't know, as I said before, we're at the very beginning of understanding what the brain can do. We've been studying hearts for a long time. We can replace one with something mechanical. We understand all that. You can't say the same about brains. We're at the beginning of that mountain. And so, relatively speaking, so digging in there a bit is important work.
I probably should have asked it sooner, but I had it lower down. How different and similar was the play creation comparing past plays like Lewis and Keely Live with Sahara play to a play like this? Were there similar to how you created, or were they more different how you created it?
This play, UnRavelled, is I think it's sort of unique in the way it arrived, as opposed to other plays like Louis and Keely, or even our American Hamlet or Ravel. This is something that, I guess like some of them, it was based on a true story. So there was a lot of research to do. But my understanding of the story, I had to go and acquire a new sense of... I had to learn a hell of a lot in order to tell this story properly and to be able to do it in a way that kept the human part in front, as opposed to having it become overwhelmingly scientific. And I hope I've succeeded. But it took me a very long time to understand something well enough to explain it simply. So there's a tremendous amount of research that I did where I just left on the floor. And it's, I got to trust that it's in there somehow, because I don't get to show it in the play. Or maybe it's there. I don't know. There's the faith of that is important somehow. This was a real stretch. And this one was chiseled in a different kind of way, because every bit of behavior, every line, every stage direction, every moment was chiseled because it had to have a meaning. There's a set of paintings that track her degeneration and expansion over time. So I had to create the behavior and the relationships that made it from point A to point B that also could work on two levels. One, just two people feeling and reacting to each other, but another one was a track of sort of what the disease was doing and how it was manifesting, and so you could read it both ways at the same time. So there's a really taut wire between every little line. So this one was very chisely.
Is there anything else I missed about the play or the creation of it that people should know about it?
It's one of those things that if you start Googling the story, it's one of those really great rabbit holes. So look up Unraveling Bolero and Google that. Enjoy.
Welcome to Stage Explorations, where we interview the theater creatives and artists from the theater world, those who perform on stage that the audience sees, and those behind the theater stage that the audience almost never sees. I am a journalist and theater fan, Buell Brown, and today's guest is...
Hi, I'm Lucy Davenport, and I'm here being interviewed about the play UnRavelled. If you'd like to find out some more about the play itself, please join us for this conversation.
When did you first fall in love with theater, and why did you have to be part of the theater world?
I think that I was very lucky in that I fell in love with theatre because my parents, although they were both doctors, took me to the theatre a lot when I was a child. And the one that really sticks out in my mind is going down. I lived in the north of England, and I went down to London to see the Royal Shakespeare Company do Nicholas Nickleby, which was this epic, legendary production. It was over 6 hours. You went in the afternoon, you went for a dinner break, and then you went back. I must have been about 8 or 9, I think, and I just wanted it never to stop, this world that they created on there. And I think that ever since then, I just had a love of it. Oh, I also have to give a caveat that my parents, though they're both doctors, they met at the theatre club at medical school, so it's their fault. It's totally their fault. And I think that it was very interesting. I was at a school I did lots of theatre at school, but no one had mentioned to me that drama school was a thing. It just wasn't on the agenda. So I went to college, I did my 3-year degree, and then I was like, well, how do I become an actor? And some people do go straight from college, but I didn't do a drama degree. So then I went to drama school, and that was when I really made the decision to make it a profession as opposed to just dabbling around the edges.
And from that, when did you fall in love with acting, and when did it go from an interest to an obsession?
I would say I fell in love with acting very early. I used to make my brother and sister do plays with me, which involved dressing my poor brother up as a girl. He was always the maid or the one who was being bossed around. And we had a little alcove in our house, which my parents put a curtain across. So we used to do little plays on Sunday afternoons and make all the parents sit through them. And I think from then on, I've always loved it. I think I knew that I wanted to do it when I was probably older, 17 or 18. But then again, it just takes a while to understand how you get, when your parents aren't in the business, to understand how you get into it. So I think I made that leap probably when I was about 16. I decided that I would do all arts A levels, which is the last exams you do in England, and more profoundly when I was at college, where I did my degree, but I also did 28 plays, some of them very badly. And that was, so it's kind of an informal training. I did everything. I did Shakespeare, I did Neil Simon, I did just everything at the Edinburgh Festival. So I think at that point I was like, yes, this is how I'm going to lead my life.
Why is acting in theater such a unique format for actors?
I think acting on stage as opposed to on film is unique because you have that immediate feedback. And I think that's what you miss most during the last 18 months when that hasn't been possible. I was actually rehearsing for a play when the pandemic hit and it got shut down. But you get an immediate feeling of feedback from the audience. And it's more than feedback, it's like you're having an experience together. And it's being in that room and feeling the electricity in the air and feeling the gasps or the in-breaths of the audience, or the, sometimes the laugh, or a sort of an exclamation, and at the end feeling how profoundly you've changed that space and their minds, hopefully, or just even entertained them and had some experience together. And film, it's a very delayed reaction you get. You don't know immediately. And I did a lot of theatre in my early years. God, that makes me sound about 85. In my early years. So I got used to that very immediate feedback, that feeling of companionship that you have when you watch something in the theatre, that you can look at the whites of their eyes and you can feel when something works. And in film, it's just a very different way of approaching the work, because you're not looking for that feedback, you're not looking for that companionship, you're looking to sort of preserve something in the moment for later. So I think that's why, for me, theatre will always be part of my sort of, I've no reason to ever want to stop doing theatre because of that. And that's what I miss doing this year, to be honest.
How is it different developing the character for a play? So how's it different, and why is it unique to you?
Well, I think that if you're developing a character for any medium, you've got to go through a process. And I was very lucky that my drama school gave you like a whole box of tools that you can use, and you pick the ones that worked for you. I would say that a theatre, when you're preparing to play a character for theatre, you just have the luxury of rehearsal, which is that you can try things out. You can really, you can take your time and build layers. They actually once at drama school told us to do a pie chart. And the pie chart could be like, okay, this is like 30% Cruella de Vil plus, 20% Lady Macbeth with a bit of, so you'd actually really develop this kind of amalgamation of things that and she walks like this and she wears these shoes, and you actually get to practice that and, see if it works. And so it's a very gradual process of building up layers. In film, you have to do that kind of privately as you prepare your own script. And you get a lot more props on the outside. They'll literally transform you into looking like the person that you're supposed to be. And you'll step into a set where that will be exactly the room that you're supposed to be in. But it's almost immediate. You have to find that where you are. and find that character in a much more private, and you don't get to try it out so many times. Sometimes you do. I've done films where we do have rehearsal, but that's the big difference for me. I enjoy both for different reasons, but I definitely enjoy the process of slowly building layers that you get in rehearsal.
And do you also like it because you do multiple performances per play, whether it's for a week or months? Are you always surprised how your character develops even during the whole play run?
Yes, I mean, I think what's interesting about doing a long run of a play is that you have this tension. And I have done, a show where I've been playing the same character for a year. The tension becomes that you become so used to it, and so it's like second nature to you. You've got to still keep your eye on where you were at the beginning, otherwise the performance becomes too unfocused. But also just the joy of discovering things as you go along, finding places that work, building, without kind of jeopardizing the arc that you've built for your character or other people's performance. And also you just get to be a lot naughtier. If you're doing a long run of a play, you can really commit to the performance, but you can also be trying to make your colleagues laugh and doing bad things upstage, which, I think when you're doing a long run, you're doing 8 shows a week, which is a lot, keeps it fresh, keeps it enjoyable, in a way that doesn't impact the audience's enjoyment, but makes it fun for you to keep it alive.
I'm one of those theater audience geeks. I love going to see it multiple times. So I always try to see the beginning, end, and middle to see how things change. It might be minor, but I feel good because most people want to go to theater performance once. I like going to see, okay, they did this different, and sometimes it's the writer, because some of the good writers, they'll adjust if they're actually there, they adjust it too. So I think it's really
totally, and they can it can be like a process of development, that's really exciting, especially when you're doing a new play. I think that is really important because you start to see what works.
And to add to that, my next question is, when did you first read a play by playwright Jake Broder, and why do you love his writing?
Well, I first read a play by Jake Broder probably in around 2001 when I met him, and full disclosure, I married him in 2004 and I'm still married to him, so I've read everything that he's written since then. We have a very collaborative sort of relationship, which is one of the great things about working together, is that we really enjoy it. We really thrive on that. I usually am the first person to read something when he's finished it, and then it becomes a process of going back and forth. So when I come to it as an actor, I've already done a lot of work on the script, which is really lovely, and I don't have to dive into a script that's completely new to me. The process is also, I have to make a shift from being an editor really to being an actor. And at that point, I have to stop thinking about whether this works in this arc or changing the words. I have to commit to what's on the page. Jake's writing is always complex. He does not like to preach to the audience or over explain anything. He likes to leave the audience to catch up and make their own decisions, which I love. I love that space in the work to do that. And he's also not afraid of big topics. I think that, his work looks at all kinds of things, from, school shootings to Alzheimer's and all those related diseases. And I just enjoy the range of that. Jake also trained we were actually at rival drama schools in London. He trained in England, so we have a lot of the same vocabulary. And that's really hugely useful. So we both come from a basis of that English theatre training, and then we have transformed that, hopefully successfully, into all other mediums. But still, we have this basis in theatre, which I think is really, we have a lot of the same tools, a lot of the same feelings about what works. And we saw a lot of the same theatre at the same time.
When did you first hear about the story Unraveled, and then when did you have to be part of the Unraveled productions? Why was it you had to?
I first heard about the story of Unraveled when Jake came in from the car, where he was half an hour later than he should have been. And I said, where have you been? And he said, I was sitting in the car listening to the radio. And they'd had this small segment on Radiolab about the relationship between Anne Adams, who is the protagonist in UnRavelled, and Ravel, who wrote Bolero. And he came in and he was completely fired up, and he immediately that evening went away and researched it. So from that point onwards, I was really interested in the story because it's fascinating. This scientist who suddenly started painting, and then, you know, seemed to have this whole like different life open up ahead of her, which then became intertwined with the disease that she was suffering from. And I can't remember exactly when I was like, I think I need to play Anne. I think maybe when I read the first draft and I thought, it's one of those parts, it's written for a mature woman. That makes me sound about 85 again. Someone who's very smart, someone who's, well, hopefully I could do that. But it was, and Jake did tell me afterwards, not when I first read it, but afterwards, that he had me in mind when he wrote it. So that was really useful. I read it and I was like, I completely get this person. I know where they're coming from. I know what their background is. Sometimes you get that as an actor where you just like there's not a lot of work involved. You don't have to do a massive amount of like imagining yourself as that person, because you just are. And when I read the first draft, I think I was like, oh, I have to play Anne. And I think I did say to Jackie, I was like, you're not doing this without me. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. I can't always say that. I have to be careful, because I can't be just like every part that I fancy in his work be like, oh, I hosey that's mine, because it has to be serving the work. But this one, I knew that I could hopefully do justice to it. So I just told him very clearly that he wasn't doing it without me.
And for those people who don't know the story, can you explain a little bit of the story arc, especially from your character's point of view?
So in UnRavelled, the story really is about Anne Adams, who is a preeminent scientist. She's been led her own cell line. She's been a real sort of light in the world of biology for years and years. And then her son had a very traumatic car accident, and I don't think they thought he was going to live. And after going through rehab, he had to come home and recover. So Anne decided to leave her job and look after him and help him recover, which he did, which is amazing. Now, while she was at home helping him recover, she started to paint. And I'm going to slip into I now because I'm so close to this character. I think that I started to paint, and it was very prosaic things. I painted strawberries, and it wasn't honestly very good. But sometime in this period, after her son was recovered and in fact went back to college, she started painting in a completely different style, and became obsessed with the piece of music Bolero by Ravel, and would play it over and over and over again. And she started to paint it. She started to translate that piece of music into a visual piece. And this was absolutely completely different from anything she'd done before. And at the end, you reveal this piece, and it really is astonishing. It's completely different in style from anything she'd ever done. And it was so good that she even got it shown in a gallery. And her husband, who she was very close to, at this stage is, excited by this painting, bemused by it, not really understanding where this complete change of focus came from. And as she goes on and starts to paint other things that happen to her, or abstract things she translates into paintings, she starts to get other symptoms. She starts to lose words. She seems to not be able to communicate what she's thinking. So eventually, after lots of resistance from Anne, her husband takes her to a neurologist, and they find out that she's actually suffering from a form of dementia called prefrontal aphasia. And this is a very cruel disease where slowly your ability to speak goes, and then slowly also you lose the ability to function physically, to point, to hold things, and then eventually to breathe. But what is the extraordinary thing about this was that this disease, which was really a death sentence and a horrible discovery for both her and her husband, had also unlocked this amazing creativity in her. And I think the play explores what happens when someone you love is sick, or what happens when you are sick. with something that you know is going to kill you, but it's also freed you to do something beautiful. And I think that a lot of people can really connect with this, because almost all of us are going to have the experience of having someone we love get Alzheimer's or a form of dementia, because our bodies are outliving our brains. We're living so much longer, that we have this whole uncharted territory between 80 and 110 now, where we're all going to get really, really old because medicine can keep us alive longer. But how will our brains cope with that? And the experience of caring for someone with a degenerative disease, or being someone with a degenerative disease, is really what this play is about. And it's been extraordinary. I would say a huge number, 75% of the hundreds of people who've seen this, have something like that in their lives, have taken care of someone who's sick, have experienced some kind of memory loss, have known someone they love go into a dark place where they think they can't follow. And that to me is why this is not only an extraordinary story of somebody rising above a terrible diagnosis, but also it touches on experience that almost all of us have experience of, which is what happens when somebody you love changes or disappears.
What do you want the audience to get out of this play?
I really would love the audience for UnRavelled to remember that all forms of dementia are not necessarily just a terrible, terrible death sentence, that we could refocus how we see people with disease as, I think there's a tendency now to be like, oh, you're broken and it's just like a hill. You're going to go down the hill, you're going to get worse and worse and worse until you die, and there's nothing you can do about it and you're powerless. What I would love them to understand is that there can be tremendous beauty and even, weirdly enough, positivity in that disease. And if you have 10 years left with dementia, you could achieve beautiful things. You could achieve amazing things. We've seen this over and over again in the people watching it and the people who contributed to the talkbacks, that the bizarre sort of effect of this disease, as well as taking things away, is also to give back. And we have a personal story in our family of somebody who was a very, very sort of terrifying figure in our family, a really difficult woman, and who'd caused a lot of hurt and pain in the family. She got dementia and she lost all of that aggression, all of that meanness, and she became this sort of small, sweet, kind, caring. And it was, from her point of view, it was probably a very freeing experience to let go of all that pain and hurt. For us around her, it was also extraordinary, because we were able to see someone who was really scary and broken and damaged just let go of all that and be really present. And she was able to meet her grandchild for the first time and take joy in that in a way that maybe wouldn't be possible. So even on a tiny personal level, I think also the big thing about this play is not only that, which hopefully is also to say we see you for the people who are caring for loved ones with this kind of disease. I mean, the amount of dedication and patience and just fortitude that caring for someone with a degenerative disease asks of someone you love is extraordinary. And I just want to say to those people who are the carers that you are seen, that you are recognized, and the extraordinary things that you have done, they mean something. They don't just disappear into a black hole. So yeah, and I think those are the most important things for me from the inside. I really believe that people should see UnRavelled, because it's a little bit to do with the fact that we're all going to face something like this in our lives. We're all going to face a time when we're going to get older and we're going to change, and how do you negotiate that? I also think that we are all going to face some kind of challenge like this. As medical science makes us live longer, we're going to get older, and we're all going to have these. But I think we're going to have something is going to kill us, probably a lot slower than it used to do. And whether you're the carer or the person suffering, this is going to be our future, and therefore it's completely universal. And so, interestingly enough, a play which on the surface is about neuroscience and art, or neuroscience and music, and the interface of those two things, is actually profoundly about being human. And one of the things that Ravel says, and I've not been very good at touching on that, it turns out that Ravel, who wrote Bolero, was actually suffering from the same disease at the same age, at the same time that he wrote Bolero. And they have this, Anne and Bolero have this connection over 100 years, which obviously is imaginary, but, well, maybe it's not. But it's the idea that you can have, like, who are you? Are you that which you do in the first 50 years of your life, or the last 20? Like, how are you defined? We define people by, are they sick or are they well? But maybe we need to open up those categories a little bit more. So not only are we all going to face a situation where we might be a carer or a caree, I think it really asks some profound questions about how the mind works. And that's why Dr. Miller, the real Dr. Miller, is so fascinated by this. Because he's like, so can you turn off one part of the brain and wake up another part of it? Because that's what this disease seems to do, at least for a short time. And the implications of that are, go to the real heart of who we are. Our brains are our motors. If you can switch one bit off and wake another bit up, what an extraordinary thing that would be. And so these implications are so universal. I love people who watch this and say, well, I'm not creative, I don't paint, I don't write music, I'm not an actor. And you're like, yes, but maybe you are, but you just haven't discovered it yet. And I think that's what's beautiful about some of the patients that we got to interview, is that some of them were like, they were people who had no contact with this kind of world. They thought, I'm not an artist, I'm not someone who makes things. And then because of this disease sort of setting them free, they made all kinds of beautiful things, music, paintings. This guy who made these incredible sculptures out of stones in spirals. And the idea that who are we and how do we access those parts of ourselves, I think is like, that applies to everybody. Which is why I think it's a beautiful story, because it could just be about a woman who gets sick and how her husband copes. But it's also a play about, like, who are we? Maybe you can be an accountant for 70 years and then discover you're a painter, or the other way around, so.
Why are institutes like the Global Brain Health Institute so important and needs the community's help and support?
Well, the GBHI, or Global Brain Institute, we all have brains. It's a completely universal experience. And it's funny. I think that we have this funny saying that we've had in our family now since we've done this play, which is, brains are the new black. It was such a huge mystery of being human for so long, and we're finding out so many more things about our brains and how they work and how they influence our behavior and our experience. And the GBHI was really formed to push beyond the sort of clinical doctor view of neurology. A little bit like something that like Oliver Sacks does, kind of take brain science and put it in the context of everyday experience. And because we all have brains, and because we are all, whether we know it or not, thinking, using them every single day, it's almost the most important thing we can do is to find out about how brains work and what makes them function well, and what can impede them. And so I think that the GBHI is reaching out beyond, oh, you would only see a neurologist if you had a problem, and saying, what can all this science that we now know about our own brains really tell us about our whole experience, about being human? And they really want to answer some of those big questions. Dr. Bruce Miller is, one of his sort of primary interests beyond treating his patients is to explore how neurology and creativity go together, because he can see in the future that might be a way to treat people who have problems, or just a way of like maximizing, there's that old adage, we only use 25% of our brain, and what should we do with all the rest of it? And so this is really on the cutting edge of how science and art can work together. And I think we think of those two things as such different disciplines, and that there's no meeting place, but there are so many meeting places for science and art. And I think we'll find more and more of those as we go on.
Yeah, it's funny, when I interviewed Victor from that organization, he was, when I asked him why his organization is important, he actually mixed why his organization and theater is so important for people. That was really interesting how he melded that. Why are playwrights like Jake Broder and local theaters so important and needs the community's help and support?
I think that theater is essential, and the best argument I can have from that is that we have always done it. Since the ancient Greeks, we know how they did it. But, even before that, the reason that people, talk about how watching TV or listening to music got them through the pandemic is that we have this basic human need to have our experience reflected back to us in music, in theatre, in film, in TV, something which tells us more about ourselves or about being human. And storytelling is, the most essential thing that we have. We've done it since we were humans. And I think there's something unique about live theatre, because there's something slightly more passive about sitting back and watching a TV show or a film, and it will transport you. But there is nothing on earth like having the experience of going into a room and having an experience in the theatre or a concert or something live with all those other people. It's also the one thing that we've really been deprived of for the last 18 months, of having that communal experience. And doing it on a local level is so important. I love that this play, we had people watching it in Germany, in Saudi Arabia. We've had, does have a truly global reach because it's online. But I also think you should go into a small theatre in LA and go and see a play about brains and music and creativity and come out with your mind blown, because you've just seen that, 20 minutes from your house. That's essential too. And that you should be able to gather again with small groups of people that live in the city you live in and have one of those experiences. And that's why theatre is essential, and why we must support our small theatres and our big theatres in opening up again and showing live events. I think we're getting there slowly, and it's a bumpy road, but it is essential. We've done it for thousands and thousands of years. And I think we all felt that huge gap that was in our lives in the last 18 months of not being able to gather together and watch or experience something together.
I have another question. It's because it's what Jake said in his interview. Mm-hmm. Jake mentioned his pandemic players. He said he had a pipe dream of creating a repertory theater that would perform Max and Willie, Last Laugh, our American Hamlet, and UnRavelled, with those 8 or 9 actors who would do all the plays. The company of people who he wants to work for the next 10 years, he says. Tell me what you think about that, and tell me why this group of unique actors is just the perfect theater team.
So Jake, the playwright, had this idea. Once we cast UnRavelled and we were able to use actors that he'd really already worked on. In fact, Leo, who plays Dr. Miller, I was rehearsing with him in another one of Jake's plays when the pandemic hit and we got closed down. This group of actors was so unique in their range and just their talent that I think it became clear that we could slot these people into a number of Jake's plays. And actually beyond that, what LA does not have is a rep theatre. We still have one in England, something like the National Theatre, where it does its own productions and uses, sometimes anyway, or the Royal Shakespeare Company uses the same actors for a whole season. And if you look at like something like American Horror Show, it's a very fun concept to see somebody, and also a group of actors who really have chemistry and work together well, translate that into all kinds of different plays. So I think the pipe dream is that this group of actors, plus another couple of people who have been very involved in Jake's plays over the years, would function as a rep company like that, and would present a number of classic plays interspersed with Jake's plays. For instance, you would do Hamlet, and then we'd do our American Hamlet, which is a take on Hamlet, and in the story of John Wilkes Booth. So yes, we are working towards that. We just had a reading of the new draft of our American Hamlet, Jake's play, which looks at kind of what we remember, and so it's looking at memory and fame and what, the kinds of things that make headlines. And of course, in the context of the Booth family, where John Wilkes Booth is the one that we remember, the assassin, rather than his brother, who was actually a very famous actor, or his father, who was also a very famous actor. Why do we choose to remember the guy who shot Lincoln? Why do we glorify the shooters? And my God, we live in a world where that happens horribly often. And I think there is a sea change in the world saying, let's focus on the victims, not on the people who perpetrate these terrible crimes, and transposing that onto the story of John Wilkes Booth. So when we realized that we could pretty much cast 2 of his plays with the same actors that did UnRavelled, we were like, So I think we're really working on that. We had this reading. We did a reading in person. We did it outside in a courtyard of, our kind of dream team to do that play, which was a lot of the same people. And I think that one of our 5-year projects is going to be bringing that to fruition, finding a home for it in LA, and having that kind of old-fashioned rep company that we would also want it to really be representative of the diversity of LA. And Jake has always wanted to do a Chicano Hamlet, and so there would be some real opportunities to make it more diverse as well. We rehearsed our American Hamlet with a really diverse cast so that it can really reflect the kind of actors that LA can offer, and I think that's truly exciting. Hi, I'm Lucy Davenport, and I'm one of the actors in the play UnRavelled. If you've enjoyed my conversation today, please come join us. You can find everything you need to know about the play, at unravelledplay.com. That's unravelled with 2 L's, play.com.
Thank you for listening or watching this podcast episode of Stage Explorations. To learn more about the theater creative and more theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations, go to www.stageexplorations.com. Once again, that is www.stageexplorations.com. There is no space between stage and explorations. You may find more videos, podcasts, and information about this theater creative and other theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations YouTube channel. Looking forward to seeing you in the theater.